Welcome, everyone. My name is David Bowders, and I'm happy today to welcome the CEO of Global Industrial, Barry Litwin. Welcome, Barry.
Thank you for having me today. It's great to be here.
So we're very excited to talk about Global Industrial, and Global's a very successful company in the marketplace, well over $1 billion, and has some very innovative approaches to the market. Before we get into that, however, Barry, can you just give us a little background on some of the positions you've had in your career that led up to Global and what some of the takeaways were as you moved through your career?
Oh, sure. It's interesting when I look back at over 25 years of experience. I've had probably about an equal balance in consumer retail as much as I have in the business to business space. And I think both experiences helps to kind of empower your thinking and gives you ideas on a regular basis. So I think that's helpful. And for me, it's really been about kind of, starting from, what I always call kind of the traditional commercial sales role, very, very early in my career. And then, moving through direct marketing, general management, and business division, chief marketing officer, and eventually moving into the digital space for a while with some pretty strong leading companies. And then having the opportunity to really run a couple businesses prior to coming to Global. I was CEO of Adorama. And during that time, I was actually on the board of Systemax at the time, and for a couple of years. And as we started to change that organization quite a bit, and became basically one large MRO industrial supplies business, I decided to come on board as the operating leader in 2019. So I had a little bit of head start learning about the business before I came into the company. But it's been a terrific journey so far.
Yeah, and as I was looking through your background, what struck me was how centered in the whole digital experience you've been in, let's say, the last decade of really working on leading edge problems in digital commerce, understanding the e-commerce and the customer experience. Can you talk a little bit about that consumer versus B2B distinction, how maybe it's starting to melt away a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's still differences relative to how purchasing agents buy for an organization versus how, you and I maybe buy as consumers each day. And I think those buying processes are still very different. But I think the way people today look at a website, to buy on a website, is starting to become much more similar. You see buyers today in the B2B space, it's a lot faster to just go onto a website, make a purchase. And when you look at comparisons between some of the best websites in our space and some of the best in the consumer retail, they start to look very much the same. A lot of use of personalization, a lot of content, a lot of great techniques in the cart to help reduce abandonment rate. And you're seeing a lot of the same capabilities cross over into those two segments. So I think the industrial distribution space, I can tell you just a short period of time that I've been with Global, I've seen a massive amount of change relative to how industrial suppliers are developing their e-commerce businesses. I think it has come really fast. And I think that's a testament to where B2B has come, because for a long time, it was kind of viewed as a laggard relative to where the consumer retail space is. And I don't think that's the case anymore.
Yeah, so when you were looking at going into Global and taking on the challenges of becoming the chief executive, what were the major market forces that you saw favoring Global, and how have you aligned yourself with those forces?
Sure, great question, David. I think one is you have a very fragmented market. And I think that helps, when you think about industrial supplies, it's very broad. And I think what's unique about the competitive set in our industry is that even within the broad fragmented market, you have, very kind of what I call sub-competitive markets that are really driven around certain categories. So they could be material handling or shipping supplies. You could have safety. You could have Jansan. And with each of those categories, there's like massive sub-industries just within those segments. So as much as we may call each other peer competitors or relative competitors, we're not all the same, versus, let's say, consumer electronics, where you've got vast majority tied up in Amazon, Best Buy, and a few others, where you have a lot more consolidation. Even though there's been severe consolidation in the industrial space, you don't feel it when you're in it. There's still within, you have to almost look at each category to see who the leaders are in that space. And I think that's what makes it really interesting.
So obviously you're very keen on micro segmentation within markets and being alert to pockets of opportunity that are maybe underserved or poorly served.
Yeah.
The ACE program at Global has been really important in terms of placing the customer experience at the center of everything that you do. Can you talk about the pillars of that program?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I think back in 2019, we were really looking for kind of a platform and a framework to be able to guide the business over the next several years. Because I think as most companies, when you start small in the space, you kind of run your business year over year and you have a new budget each year and you just keep operating that way. And I think we needed to start thinking a little bit more longer term, as most companies start to scale up in terms of size. They need to think a little bit more strategically. So I think for us, it was really just an opportunity for us to get together as a business and think, what's the path for us going forward? And that really became, what our internal strategy is around ACE, which is accelerating the customer experience. And then within there, we look at, traditional areas that I think are going to be important, not just for our business, but for what the distribution industry in general sees as critical. For us, it's, getting the multi-channel selling model down and improved, right? That's an important part. That includes digital and sales and inside sales that most of the distributors in our space are going to market with. At the same time, then you have, products, you have national brand, you have private brand. So that becomes a key pillar because that's why your customers keep coming to you for the quality of your products. And that's important. The other area really centers around operational excellence. We've had to expand, a couple of DCs over the last several years and continue to work on refining the overall fulfillment experience and distribution experience for our customers. And so that's been a journey, that, kind of takes on new initiatives each year and is driven. At the same time, you've got customer service and how you're bringing in automation and areas like that to help make the experience faster for customers. And of course, you've got your people. That's the cornerstone of the business in terms of the people and how, in our organization, we're kind of blessed with a set of institutional folks that have been in our company for a long time and that really understand the business. And we've been able to blend that with kind of new skills and capabilities to enable us to evolve as a company. So those are really the framework and the pillars that we operate under with the ACE strategy.
So I know Global's had a very innovative approach to how to serve the marketplace in terms of being digital first and less reliant on bricks and mortar, let's say, than some of the legacy distributors, and also in terms of sales coverage models, having outbound calling inside sellers as opposed to the car key briefcase toting sales reps. Can you talk a little bit about how that aligns with customer expectations and how that's provided competitive advantage for Global?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think for Global Industrial, we've had a history of kind of being in the e-commerce space for a long time. Some of our legacy businesses and Systemax were digital businesses as well. So we kind of have some of that domain expertise on board, and we continue to leverage that as one of the ways in which we communicate our products and communicate our value and drive transactions each day. So that experience for us continues to evolve every day, and we focus on trying to make it better. But as you start to service that segment of the market, we have other channels, sales channels that help us quite a bit. Our inside selling organization is a big piece. You think back in the catalog days, you pick up a catalog and call somebody on an inbound sales center, and that still exists for us. I think that's an important part of our business. And then certainly our value starts to step up quite a bit more when we engage with one-to-one selling agents, which we have in our organization as well. So both folks that work from an office or from their home in an account management capacity, as well as folks that are, in a sense, outside sales and out on the street working more face-to-face with customers. And I think what's unique about that is I think that's where the real value comes out, because the capabilities to be able to deliver knowledge and solutions about how our products can fit within a particular customer's environment is really the things that we hear each day are some of the most valuable things that customers find in working with Global Industrial. It's that personal connection. It's the knowledge that we can bring in various different categories. And I think our goal is to copy, paste, repeat that approach as often as we can amongst our assigned business. And I think that is a huge value of the overall organization that we hear each year. Then we've got other channels that we operate in, but for the most part, that is kind of our go-to-market model in the ways in which we approach the market.
I think to me, what strikes me about Global is that the digital e-commerce part of it wasn't like the afterthought of the business. It was front and center for at least the most recent era. And that, for a lot of companies, they're so dependent on their feet on the street that they don't really understand or commit to the digital experience. Can you talk a little bit about that being the North Star for the company?
Yeah, I think it's a great call out. I think that, within the competitive space, there are some companies that were kind of born up, either they're an integrated supply or whether they were heavy with vending machine operations and businesses, and that really wasn't us. We operated a little bit differently from a digital perspective. We started that way a long time ago. Our company's been around for over 70 years. So we've certainly evolved in that capability, but that was an area that we always held pretty true to the organization and continue to invest and develop. So that's been kind of our model to start, but it's evolved over time. I think the sales component of what we do is a really important piece, but we do always fall back to what can we do to help improve the digital experience, not just in terms of what people see on our website, but also what I call the digital supply chain. How do people get information, in regards to where's their order, what's the timing of delivery they expect to get with the products they buy. Those are also other things that we've evolved over time so that digital becomes more a part of the overall end-to-end experience in the business, including the information and dashboards that customers can get to tell them about their account, tell them about their pricing, things like that. Those are all really important ways to kind of leverage digital across everything that a buyer really needs on a day-to-day basis. So we do quite a bit of development, innovation around that area, and continuing to try to look at market trends, look at what our customers are telling us, see what's happening in the competitive space, and saying, oh, that's a great idea. Maybe that's something we should incorporate. So we do a lot of that. And then I think digital transcends a lot of what happens inside the company, in terms of automation and in terms of pricing and how we use AI to be able to help us in terms of making decisions a lot faster and using big data and crunching data to be able to get insights faster so we can make change in the organization. That's a really important component, I think, of the whole digital experience, both from a customer standpoint and both from what our associates experience internally in helping to do their jobs and solve customer problems each day.
Yeah, I think I know that Global's profitability and revenues exploded during the pandemic period. Can you talk a little bit about the accelerator effect that Global experienced during the pandemic?
Well, the pandemic was kind of an interesting period, as we all know. You were kind of starting out, and nobody really knew what was going to happen at that point. And we happened to identify during that period that customers and manufacturers weren't necessarily buying some of the products that we sold every day, but we were able to unlock a few categories that for the most part help companies return to the office, partitions, which we've been big in, and areas like that. And I think that was an interesting aspect of the business at the time, and kind of give a lot of credit to the associates and our people and being able to figure out, how to crack the code, during a pretty tough time. And so we were able to unlock certain categories that we did really well during that period. And as that mix started to shift, we went back to our regularly scheduled programming as the market started to return, and we got heavy, back into our core customers, and they started buying again the things that we've been selling for years. So it's been an interesting shift relative to assortment strategy, throughout the last several years in terms of what's been happening with pandemic and then post-pandemic. So we were pretty proud of our agility during that stage to be able to adapt to what we were being given in the market. And I think that's kind of part of our core value, as a company. I mean, we look at being nimble, we roll up our sleeves, try to get things done. Those are part of our core values as a business, and solving customer problems every day. That's really what we strive to do, and create a better frictionless experience for the customer.
I know from our work with Global at SPARXiQ that we see that in the people that we engage with on a daily basis, is that certain, I'm not sure what name to put on it, except that it's very much dynamic and high energy and positive. How do you cultivate that in the organization? I know talent is high on your radar.
Yeah, no, I think it's like any company that, you've got to drive and execute in the business. It's more than just, putting out a plan, which we've done. We've put a core plan out there, but it's also being able to develop people in the company, giving them the ability to kind of test and learn. And we know that failure is always going to be a part of projects. Sometimes they're not going to go right. But I think the ability to kind of root cause it and to kind of champion as an organization, okay, that maybe that didn't work, but what did? And then coming back and trying it again, I think that's really, really key in terms of the organizational change in the company, and I think having a very clear plan is important for any business. Having clear initiatives with clear metrics, that's really important. So what happens is you build an organization, a culture that's all about trying to solve problems. And if you can create an organization that's a problem-solving organization, you should be able to continue to move ahead of market over time. And so I think that culture has been driven. We value leadership, we value high communication throughout the business. We value being able to kind of see a problem or see an issue and just go after it and try to solve it. So, we always have a little bit of a mantra in the company. We don't like spectators, we like players. So folks want to get in every day. It's okay to watch on the sideline, but at some point you got to engage and say, I'm going to take that piece. So I think that's part of the culture, and maybe some of the energy you see as we've worked with you guys in the past.
Yeah, I think that, with the innovation, it's so important, because you talk about having the customer experience front and center for the organization. You have to have a mindset of innovation, I think, if you're really but as you think about the journey, part of it is creating value. We talked about the customer being at the center of the experience, and how your team interacts with them on a daily basis. Creating value is one thing, capturing value is another. And
Sure.
That's a lot of companies that have worked hard at creating value, unfortunately, don't survive in the marketplace. They're part of Schumpeter's creative destruction. And despite their best efforts, they just don't have a viable business model. How have you been intentional at Global about making sure that the investments you make to create customer value also are retained as shareholder and stakeholder value?
Yeah, I mean, that's in terms of looking at projects and investments you make and the return on investment levels that you expect to be able to profit from those things that you're putting into the business. So I think for us, we have a pretty high focus around return on investment. We always try to ask ourselves the question, what does success look like, for a particular project? Both in terms of what it means for the customer competitively, and then what's it going to cost, and can we cover that cost? That's a big approach to doing that. I think when it comes to the same thing as it relates to pricing, and overall profitability, I think pricing intelligence is a really important component for most distributors today, and certainly you see that scaling quite a bit, and some of the techniques and capabilities there. So you always want to provide value to the customer in terms of your pricing, but at the same time, you want to be able to extract, margin from that pricing strategy to help, cover the cost of the innovation you're putting into the business. So I always say it's a really big balance, and if you have kind of a metrics-driven approach and you're working closely with financial teams in the company to understand what the return on investment hurdle is, it becomes a lot easier for you to kind of move forward and make decisions based on, where you have opportunity to make money, And even some projects you may decide that I'm going to make a little bit less here, because it makes a better experience for the customers. So those are all the things we look at in the business when we're making decisions on pursuing projects.
So it seems to me like not only has Global been obsessive about making sure that the customer is at the center of investment, but you've also had, I don't know if you reflected on this at all, but you've had very much a lean approach to where you put resources in the business compared to a lot of, let's say, traditional distributors. They have a very different asset and expense structure compared to Global. Can you talk a little bit about how that choice of business model and resourcing has delivered superior shareholder returns?
I think for the most part, when we think about that, we try to start with the end in mind. So what are we trying to accomplish in our strategy? And then we asked ourselves the question, do we have the capabilities, for example, internally, to be able to support that? And if we don't, do we have to build that, internally, or do we go outside for that in the short term, if it's particularly something very new where we're still in kind of a test and learn phase? And then as you start to pilot and test programs and you start to see that return coming, now you have the ability to maybe invest in, a resource internally to kind of support that, or shift an existing resource into that role. So we kind of look at the strategy, kind of driving the people strategy in terms of how we look at core functions and things that we need in the business. Like any company, you're usually really good in a number of different areas, but there's some areas that you may not have the internal capability to get there. So we've had to make those decisions throughout the years in terms of where we put investment in people and talent and software and all those things. But we really kind of let the strategy drive that. We ask, where do we want to go? What is our strategy calling for? And do we have the ability to actually execute on that ourselves, within the company? So, that usually brings up the topic of talent and people and consulting service, everything you do there. So I think that it's part of kind of operating with the end goal in mind, and then kind of working back in terms of looking at the resource requirements.
So as you think about where the market's headed from here, the next decade, what are some of the emerging trends that you see guiding your market strategy, and what are some of the biggest questions that nobody yet knows the answer to?
I tell you, there's a lot happening, and you guys, all know that. I mean, you take a look at the tipping point that we're probably starting to see with AI. You're seeing it in terms of content generation, creative writing. You're looking at it in terms of solving, algorithmic problems relative to data analysis, pricing intelligence. You're seeing it starting to influence all aspects of the business. And so I think most of the software applications and vendors that folks are working on are all being designed to increase productivity, but most importantly, to be able to make decisions faster, to help speed up a business. So I think AI is a really, really important area, and we're seeing it really start to unfold here in the industry. I think sales automation's been around for a while, but I think the smarter in terms of data you can provide to your sales organization about their customers, more of a personalized experience they can tailor to those customers, and that drives better, customer satisfaction scores in the business. So I think sales automation is continuing to evolve, both in terms of just how to, software that helps to organize how sales organization kind of works with their customer base, but also in terms of some of the decision making that goes on in terms of what products to sell on a given day. I think that's an evolutionary area that's happening as well. And I can't forget about warehouse automation. We've just come through a massive several years in terms of labor rate increases, labor shortages, in terms of the traditional distribution warehouse operation. And I think automation is really starting to become critical, to be able to drive down long-term operating expenses for fulfilling products. So I think continuing to keep, on top of what's happening within the fulfillment and distribution arena as it relates to automation is really, really important. You look at the AMRs that are out there, being able to move products up and down aisles. I think those things are really, really critical for the distribution and fulfillment organization. I think it's going to be with us for a long time. looking at that. So those are some of the areas that I would see as being important to keep on the lookout for the next several years.
That's great. What are your thoughts on organic versus inorganic growth in terms of what you develop through your own capabilities and people versus acquisition? Do you have thoughts on the relative importance of those?
Yeah. I mean, I think for every company, it's a little bit different. I think in some markets where there's fragmentation and you need to scale, acquisition could be a route. But I think it's always a lot better to build a strong foundation organically. I think if you don't have a strategy, you don't have a strong foundation, it becomes a lot harder, I think, to acquire, because your reason for acquiring becomes a little muddy. You're not quite sure where it can make a benefit. I'm talking more generalities in terms of the industry in general. But I think, for us, we've been focusing quite a bit around our organic strategy and trying to perfect that. And we're not quite there yet, but we're making progress. So I think as that continues to evolve, you start to see companies that are taking different positions in acquisition to help maybe grow into a new product category, grow into a new customer segment. I think those are all viable opportunities. So I think the acquisition has to follow the strategy with the business, and that's kind of been our position.
I like the organic first idea, because I think a lot of companies use acquisition as a crutch for a lack of innovation, a lack of let's say just the ability to keep up with trends in the marketplace.
Sure.
And that really actually destroys value, I think, is what you see for companies that don't place organic first, as they end up in a value destroying acquisition path where until the shareholders finally blow the whistle, it can go on for a long time.
Sure.
I know it's been an interesting career for you, and even looking forward, I'm sure you've got big plans for global. What are some of the pivots that you wish you'd made earlier in your career, if you think back on how you could have clipped some corners in the race or things like that?
Yeah, I think as any leader today, that they talk about the opportunity to listen to teams, listen to the organization. I spend a lot of time in the organization, meeting with our local distribution teams, leading with our sales teams, because I've learned over time that it's important to kind of hear folks out. And, I always have a mantra that, all the great ideas are already in the building. Our job as leaders is to really just figure out how to scoop them up. And we can only do that by listening to people and actually taking time out of our day to do that. So that was something that I think I've certainly grown and evolved over time in that capability. And I have found that, sometimes if you just ask the question, people will tell you what you want to know. So if you don't ask the question and you think you've got all the answers, then you really don't get the real scoop. So that's been a nice evolution for me, just personally, spending a lot of time at the local level with our folks and hearing on the ground what's happening. That's really important. And then the other one is like anything else, prioritization, in the business, and right, true to a strategy, and if one piece doesn't work, don't be wed to it. Just move it aside and bring something else in. I think that's that test and learn philosophy. But I think that's been a evolution as well from a leadership perspective that I've been focused on.
Yeah, I remember as we were preparing for the call, you said that one of them was simply saying no to more things and realizing the importance of crossing things off the list in order to accomplish things that are on the list.
Yeah, it's a good point. We all have a lot of things that we're pursuing in parallel path across the organization. And sometimes it's important to sit back and say, what's on the stop doing list? That frees up time for the things you need to do.
Well, it's been a great pleasure having you on here today, Barry, and sharing all of your experience and thoughts on the industry. And we wish you and Global all the best and look forward to our work together.
Great. Thanks, David. It was a pleasure to be on the podcast today, and look forward to a few more.
Thank you. Take care.